Eternal God, as we ponder your being, existence, attributes, and your works, including predestination earlier, we turn now to church history and study Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Help us to learn of him, about him, and through him. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. We turn now to John Strype, who's written many good books on the English Reformers, including Grindal, I think one on Parker, definitely one on Whitgift. He was a French Huguenot whose family fled in the French wars against the Huguenots to England and became a Church of England man and a great admirer of the English Reformers. The works of Strype need no encomium or elucidation from the pen of an editor. They have long been considered as amongst the best authorities and forming a most valuable portion of the history of the Reformation of religion in this country, no less than as of a standard excellence, inasmuch as the narratives of the most interesting events in the annals of our country were based by this author upon documentary evidence and drawn from the original manuscripts, the greater part of which are still extant. Valuable, however, as Strype's works must ever be considered, they have hitherto been of little service to the masses of our population, by whom their existence is almost unknown. Indeed, their circulation has been chiefly confined to the wealthy, for even the clergy have been compelled to resort to public libraries and literary institutions to obtain the means of perusal, the outlay of their purchase being utterly beyond the means of the greater number of that useful and important body. It may not perhaps be too much to assert that had the elaborate his R.Y. of the Reformation, as is contained in the whole works of Strype, been in general circulation among the clergy, it would have been well nigh impossible that so many of them could of late years have been so fearfully misled by the insinuations of designing men as to have perverted by the doctrines of that church, the misdoings of which previously to the era of the Reformation, Strype has so distinctly traced and unfolded. In the hope, therefore, that the republication of the entire works of Strype at a price which will place them within the reach of every person who desires to become acquainted with the facts of the Reformation, may be the means to a more general knowledge and understanding of that important event. The first volume of the Memorials of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer is presented to the public. The second and concluding volume will be issued in the month of August. Should the reception which these volumes may meet with appear to justify a continuance of the works of Strype, they will be followed at the same price per volume at intervals of about 2 months until the entire series is completed by the publication of the ecclesiastical memorials, the annals of the Reformation, the lives of Archbishop Parker, Grindal, and Whitgift. The footnotes introduced in this volume will indicate the manner by which, let me try something here, get this, this is a 500-page volume, we would note. The footnotes introduced in this volume will indicate the manner by which it is intended to illustrate this edition, All the documents quoted by the author and contained in the appendices will be collated and verified whenever they can be found and consulted. Any errors that may be found therein will also be corrected. Those errors are chiefly to be attributed to the inaccuracy of the copyists whom the author employed and are still perpetuated in other editions. The greatest pains will be taken to ensure accuracy, that this edition may be as perfect as possible. To the Most Reverend Father in God, John, by the divine providence, Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, Prelate of all England and Metropolitan, one of the Majesty's most honorable privy court, to pardon the presumption of the obscure person that dedicates this book to your grace, for the sake of the renowned man of whom it treats, one of your illustrious predecessors, and Archbishop of Canterbury, that hath so eminently of that day of the whole British Church. I may say that deserved best of any archbishop before him that wore the mitre, to whose solid learning, deliberation, and indefatigable pains, both the kings and people of this realm owe their deliverance from the long and cruel bondage of Rome. For it is true what the Romanists say in obloquy of this archbishop, and we Protestants say it to his eternal fame, that he was the first Archbishop of Canterbury that made a defection from the papal chair, thereby vindicating this crown from the base dependence upon a foreign jurisdiction. Whereas Parsons says, and this is written to Archbishop Tillotson, late 17th century, this was the first change of religion in any Archbishop of Canterbury from the beginning of his days. This is not so true, for sundry of Archbishop Cranmer's predecessors, to look no further than 200 or 300 years backwards, were of different judgments from the Church of Rome in some points. His immediate predecessor, Warham, approved of the king's title of supreme head of the church under Christ in his own kingdom, against the doctrine of the Pope's universal authority. And a century of years before him, Archbishop Chichely, though he were made the Pope's legate, refused to exercise his power, legatine, further than he should be authorized thereunto by the king. And Archbishop Islip, long before him, disliked of dissolving those marriages that were contracted by such bad before vowed to single life. For though he had laid a punishment upon a Countess of Kent, who being a widow and then professed afterwards, secretly married to a certain knight named Agincourt, I guess, that he divorced them not, but permitted them to live together. And the judgment of Archbishop Arundel, who lived in King Richard II's reign, was for the translation of the scriptures into the vulgar tongue and for the laity's use thereof. That's a new one. For he, preaching the funeral sermon of Queen Anne, the beloved wife of that king, after she deceased at shame in the year 1392, commended her for other virtuous accomplishments, so particularly for her study of the Holy Scriptures and her sense of them, and for having them in the Vulgate tongue. I find by an ancient manuscript fragment written nearly 300 years ago, formerly belonging to the Church of Worcester, in the following words. We'll skip that. So that it is not true what Parsons says, if he mean that no archbishops before Cranmer varied from the Church of Rome in any of her doctrines. But true it is, though not so much to their credits, that none of them, however sensible they were of the Roman errors and superstitions, did in good earnest bestir themselves to set this church free of them before our above named Archbishop, being the 68th from Augustine the monk, resolutely and bravely undertook and effected it. Indeed, they spent not their zeal, their treasure, and interest this way so much as in contending about the superiority and prerogatives and exempting their clergy from the cognizance of the temporal magistrate and applications to and courting of bishops from the temporal and courting the bishops of Rome and persecuting those heretics, something their own names, by founding religious houses, building stately palaces and shrines, and exhibiting something in great worldly pomp and appearance. But blessed be the God for Archbishop Cranmer, by means of whose Reformation succeeded a series of better, though not so splendid, archbishops, who made conscience of minding things more suitable to their high vocation and the spiritual trust committed to them. Men that regarded little or nothing the vain shows of exterior grandeur and glory, nor sought great things for themselves, but with their great predecessor, St. Paul, on whom lay the care of all the churches, spent and wore themselves out in the restoration of the kingdom of Christ so happily, begun by the said Archbishop Cranmer in this island. Such were Parker, Grindal, Whitgift, the three first Protestant archbishops next after him. What he planted, they watered, and God bless the increase, whose most excellent lives and conducts in the government of this church, as well as in their own more private and domestic conversation, their rare piety, prudence, patience, courage, and activity, I scarcely can temper my pen from making excursions into, of which I could fill even volumes had I leisure, favor, and countenance, from those large collections which I have for divers years been storing up with great delight, partly out of their own original letters and partly from other manuscripts in their time. Besides these first archbishops during the long reign of Queen Elizabeth, who by their care and diligence established and settled the Reformation, of which Archbishop Cranmer laid the first stones, we are beholden unto the same archbishop for all the rest of the worthy and painful prelates of that metropolitan political see, who have taken care of this excellently reformed church, even unto your grace, whose deserts towards this church and the Reformation have raised you to sit in Archbishop's chair. Though with as much reluctancy in you as was in him, of your grace's endowments to qualify you for this most eminent station, I will be wholly silent, knowing how abhorrent your generous nature is from reading or hearing your own commendations. Now, my Lord, is this my end and this my dedication? But this is, it is, that you would so far encourage these weak and imperfect labors done out of a good intent as to cast a favorable eye upon them for the sake of your glorious predecessor, and to repute me among the number. May it please your grace of your humble and most obedient servants, John Strype or John Strype. Preface. I think it fit by way of preface to these memorials to admonish the reader of a few things preparatory to the perusal, as what it was put on me at first upon making these collections concerning Archbishop Cranmer and the state of the church at his time. what induced me to make them public, and what credit may be given them, with some other occasional matters. As to the first, I have been for a long time not a little addicted to read whatsoever I could of the Reformation of this famous church, that I might truly understand for what reasons it was at first attempted, in what methods it proceeded, by what men it was chiefly managed and carried on, and how it stood in truth as to its doctrine, discipline, and government, reputation, learning, piety, and such like in its first establishment and the earlier times of it. For which purpose I did not only read over what we have in print of these matters, but for more satisfaction I was carried on to look into the manuscripts, whether registers, records, letters, instruments, and such like, a great sort of which by providence fell into my hands. Besides them, I have turned over many more in libraries and elsewhere, from whence I made transcriptions, extracts, and collections for my own use and satisfaction, which swelled to no little bulk. And while I was doing this, I took always a more curious view into the lives and manners and doings, learning, virtue, and abilities of the chief leading men, whether archbishops and bishops or other churchmen, of whom we have little account extant, though many of them very great and learned men, little more remaining of some of them than their names. The reverence I bore in my mind to Archbishop Cranmer, the father of the Reformation here in England, and the first of that ancient metropolitan spheres that so bravely shook off the Pope and appendages, inclined me especially to gather up what notices I could of him. Afterwards, as my leisure served me, out of my indigested mass of notes, I compiled into some order memorials of him and of the affairs of the church during his primacy, in which for the most part he was concerned, and bore a great share with King Henry and Lord Cromwell, his vicegerent, in spirituals. After some years, these memorials lying by me, I largely, considerably digested them into annals and thoughts of making them public, being excited and encouraged thereunto by my friends, who were privy to these. And indeed, many considerations induced me hereunto, as in general the great benefit of reading histories of former times, which what that is take in the words of John Fox, for if the things which be first are to be referred before those which be later, then is the reading of histories much necessary in the church, to know what went before and what followed after. And therefore, not without cause, Historia in old authors is called the witness of times, the light of verity, the life of memory. Without knowledge, the knowledge whereof a man's life is blind, and soon may fall into any kind of error, as by manifest experience we have to see in these desolate times of the church, when the bishops of Rome, under color of antiquity, have turned truth into heresy, and brought such newfound devices of strange doctrine and religion as before in the former ages of the church were never heard of, and all through the ignorance of the time and for lack of history. Therefore, the use of history being so considerable, historians in some kingdoms have been maintained by public encouragement. And so the writer of the Epistle to King Edward, before Erasmus's paraphrase English, propounded once to that king that there should be a public salary allotted to some able persons to translate good books and to write protocols for bestowing such a great benefit on the commonwealth. but particularly the history of the church and matters relating to religion have a more special benefit, being conversant about spiritual things, which are weightier by far and concern us more a great deal than temporal. But more's the pity in this sort of history, there is a greater defect than in any other. I speak of our own nation, though the history of the state in the last age was excellently done by the pens of Lord Herbert and Mr. Camden. Yet the matters of the church they professedly declined and did but touch at. The former saying expressly his intention was not a history to discuss theological matters, holding it sufficient to have pointed at the places where they are controverted. And the latter in history, as so often he came to matters of the church, tells us that he left his readers to the ecclesiastical historian, which hath made me wonder at and apt to accuse the slothfulness of that age during all the time of King Henry, King Edward, and Queen Mary, wherein religion was tossed about and took up so much of those reigns. There is no one ecclesiastical history thereof written, except that of the diligent and learned Mr. Fox. And during the long reign of Queen Elizabeth and King James, I think none at all. Till of late years, when by length of time and destruction of many original manuscripts, by the civil wars, divers remarkable transactions were buried and lost. Some few learned men employed themselves in collecting and publishing what memorials of religion and the church they could retrieve, namely Dr. Fuller, Dr. Halen, and especially Dr. Burnett, the Right Reverend Bishop of Sarum, to whom the English Church must be ever beholden for his great and happy pains contributed. But yet there be good gleanings after these writings, and many things of remark there are relating to the church in those 3 busy reigns of Henry, Edward, and Mary, whereof these historians are either wholly silent or speak imperfectly and erroneously. Some whereof in my searches I have met with, which I have disposed in these memorials. Besides the general benefit of history, especially ecclesiastical, this particular history now recommended unto the English nation may produce this good effect, to make us value and esteem, as we ought, our reformed religion. When we see by what just and fair ways it went on, and how it prevailed like Christianity at first, notwithstanding the great opposition it met with, and what sort of men they were, such as Gardiner and Bonner, who especially set themselves to stop it. Moreover, the reading the lives of exemplary men and such as were famous in their generation hath a great virtue in it to influence the manners of men. Their wise sayings, their discreet behavior, their just management of matters committed to their trust, their zeal, their charity, their awe of God, their contempt of the world, and such like, are not only delightful to read and hear, but do insensibly instill into men's mind a secret approbation thereof, and draw them on to an imitation. This land hath produced many admirable men, the knowledge of whom and with the benefit of whose examples is utterly lost, for want of some writers to leave their memory unto the world. It was a thing complained of in the last age, that as that age abounded more in writers than any age before it, so there were very few that set themselves to pen the lives of very excellent men. As Samuel, the learned and worthy son of John Fox, spake, but he ever thought it, as he said, most unjust, notwithstanding, to deprive the world of the memory of matters done by them, by whose labors and worthy deeds the common state of the country was so much bettered. And if the use of history, as the same author says, is to form lives and manners of men, that being the chief end of history, then I add no part of history doth more promote this than the history of the deeds of famous men. It was another great inducement to let this work see the light, to be grateful to the memory of this holy prelate that hath so well deserved of this church, and to whom under God she oweth that excellent constitution and reformed state, in which it cost him so dear, so many pensive thoughts, so many long hours of study, so many consultations and debates with learned men, so much correspondence abroad, so many speeches, arguments, and strugglings in Parliament, in the convocation, before the king, the clergy, the people, so much danger and trouble, and envy and reproach, and at his last dearest, his blood. Posterity would be highly injurious to such a person as this, if he should not be recorded with all due respect and honor. A commendable practice of the ancient Persians to write in records the names and good deeds of such as had deserved well of kin and kingdom to remain forever. And these records kings themselves did sometimes used to read. The king Ahasuerus called one night for them to read to him, to entertain his waking hours. And Zenos, in an epistle to Pausanias, extant in Thucydides, told him that the good deed was upon record in his palace forever. For these records were esteemed so precious that they were kept within the walls of the palace. And this custom of writing up the remembrance of men of merit seemed also among the Jews. This is said of Judas Maccabeus, that the remembrance of him was a blessing forever. That was written for those that feared God and thought on his name. And surely it is agreeable to God's will that this piece of gratitude should be shown to men of singular virtue deceased, to keep their names and good deeds upon record for posterity to know and thank God for. This office of love and duty seems highly convenient to be done towards Archbishop Cranmer, that something might appear in the world for his vindication under those many base aspersions and lying insinuations that are and have been printed by the papists to defame and blacken him to posterity. One of them hath these words, which show that he cared not what he did, so he might something through his dirt upon the chief light of the Reformation. Quote, the very pillars of this rank, which he names to be Luther, Bucer, Peter Martyr, Cranmer, Ridley, Latimer, Hooper, Rogers, Farrar, Taylor, Tyndall, all married priests and friars. Some of them were never friars and others never married. Were men given to their sensualities, both of women and other like commodities, after the fashion of ordinary men. Neither is there recounted any one eminent action in all their lives that I have read, either of chastening their bodies, mortifying their appetites, condemning the world and the pleasures thereof while they have and use the same, or finally any more excellent above the rest. It is a sign to be read but little there, read with a cankered mind. The ensuing book shall effectually confute these misreports and slanders of Cranmer, one of these pillars, as he calls them, and it shall abundantly be made clear that he was no sensualist, nor addicted, notwithstanding his high place, to the pleasure and commodities of this world. The third thing remains, which is indeed the main matter that makes a history of any account, and what credit to be given what I have writ. For if it stood not upon the foot of truth, it is not history, but a romance, a legend, a mere tale. And I here remember what John Fox said to Alan Ope concerning a history, which is as true of a history writer. If you will be a controller in story matters, diligence is required in the searching out of books and authors, not only of our time, but of all ages, and especially where matters of religion are touched pertaining to the church. It is not sufficient to say what Fabian or what Hall said, but the records must be sought. The registers must be turned over. Letters also and ancient instruments ought to be perused, and authors with the same compared. Finally, the writers themselves, one must be conferred with another, so with judgment to be weighed, with diligence to pure from addition, and partiality to be uttered. Now to measure myself, diligence and faithfulness, I trust, have not been found wanting in me. I have been governed by a hearty desire and love of truth. I have read over many printed books as are of the best credit and vogue, and I have often compared them with good manuscripts, especially when I have had occasion to make use of them, which I have done but sparingly and briefly, that I might not cumber the book with what hath been known and written afore. But the collections I have made herein published to the world are chiefly manuscripts, records, registers, letters, orders of council, original and authentic. For besides Archbishop's Cranmer's register in great folio, in which I bestowed considerable time, I have had the perusal of several rare papers preserved in the invaluable library of Archbishop Parker, that great antiquarian, collected by him and now remaining in the private library of Bennett College in Cambridge, among which there is a writing entitled A Declaration Concerning the Progeny, with Manners and Trade of Life and Bringing Up of the Most Reverend Father in God, Thomas Cranmer, late Archbishop of Canterbury, and by what order and means he to preferments and dignities, which it was drawn up by Cranmer's secretary at the desire of Archbishop Parker and for his use. I have, in what remaineth of the papers of John Fox, communicated to me by the favor of William Willies, Esquire, among which there is a manuscript Life of Cranmer, Annals, writ by an Augustinian monk of Canterbury, from the year 1532 to 1558. Many letters of Fox and other learned men to him, relating to the affairs or affliction of the church in those times, and abundance more too long to be inserted. I have consulted also many manuscripts of great worth, originally belonging to Lord Treasurer Burleigh's secretary, imparted to me by Sir William Hickey of Low Leighton in Essex, knight and baronet, wherein are divers of Archbishop Cranmer's letters, written by his own pen. By the kindness of the Reverend Mr. Nicholas Batley of Kent, and his great readiness and zeal to forward my design, I have received a great many material out of the registers and records of the Cathedral Church of Canterbury, and out of other books, from manuscripts William Pate of the Inner Temple, Esquire, keeper of the Tower Records, did with great humanity communicate unto me his collection of excellent papers, contained in 2 large volumes, which though in these memorials I have made but little use of, yet may be admirably subservient to me, and whosoever's lot it may happen to fall to give the world some account of Queen Elizabeth's archbishops and the church affairs in their times. In this catalogue of friends and assistants, I must mention also the Reverend Dr. Thomas Smith and Mr. Henry Wharton. Mr. Lawton, keeper of the Public Library, Cambridge, and Mr. Harrison, fellow of Sydney College in that university. And to all these gentlemen now named, I do here, as I ought in gratitude, public knowledge myself as beholden. And we'll bring this to a close here. So we learn that in controlling and governing providence of the eternal God, Mr. Reverend John Strype, descendant of French Huguenots, investigate all the background and the value of church history. Let us pray. Blessed Lord, what may we learn from Cranmer's life that speaks anew and afresh to us today of how we may better glorify you and serve you, keep our eyes on you, advance your word and your gospel and kingdom. Strengthen our hold on that, O Lord, and may the meditations of our heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.